My passion, like Mona said, is integrating water across infrastructure projects. I've worked a lot on infrastructure, mostly linear infrastructure, throughout the past 15 to 20 years, quite a lot with Mona and Network Rail. And I actually quite like telling people I'm a drainage engineer, because I think it is still one of those underappreciated disciplines. Yeah, it is, as everyone is here today, and as Mona's already said, it is fundamental to how that railway, how that road, how that airfield operates. If it's done well, nobody notices it. It's when it's not done well, it throws everything out. We've talked about that. I'm going to actually start with an end slide as well, I'll come back to this, because this is, for me, what it's about today. So we've talked about holistic water management, but we've talked about that in the context of the physical elements of the system, earthworks, track drainage, how we link those things up. But it's also about being curious, understanding the context, but collaborating, because there's a lot of stakeholders that sit outside of Network Rail as well and national highways. And when I talk about curiosity, so we talk about, rail embankments and track drainage and, stakeholders outside, but it is really, really a system, and a system of a system. And in what context are we operating? So we've talked climate change, we've talked water scarcity, and all of these things that we really need to understand, and what questions are we trying to answer with what we're trying to do. Not in the scale of my 6-year-old where he asks me, why is a plate round? But it is that element of curiosity that I really think then pulls us back to understand the context, to be collaborative, because the world is changing, funding is changing. We talked about, again, physical systems and people, but funding, we need to be a lot more creative with the money we've got. And so collaborating and doing that properly and really, really well, and getting to those creative solutions. So I'm going to really step back, because I know not everyone here is probably from a water world, and talk about what we mean by catchments. And I was trying to think of where to start and how complicated this actually is. And when we talk about a catchment, so we've talked a lot about the flood risk, climate change, resilience side. We've got river basins. Everything flows out to a river, out to the coast. And I think there's 12 river basin districts across the UK. But then within that, those are broken down. We've got roughly 100 principal river catchments that are managed by the Environment Agency. Then you come down to surface water catchments. Nobody knows how many of those we've got. And then you come down to Network Rail catchments. I'm not going to give away any spoilers about how many of those there are. That will come soon. But what I did mention, so with surface water ones, they don't necessarily drain to a river or a water body. They'll, an area that's drained by an outfall. And then obviously with Network Rail or national highways or pieces of linear infrastructure, you cut across a lot of those catchments. On top of that, one of many, you've got other people delivering national strategy. So you've got people looking at shoreline management plans. How are we managing the coast? And, are we doing managed retreat on the coast? Are we holding the line? What are we doing there? It all factors into how we consider a catchment. And that's without even considering water resources. So we all know what a water company is. They supply our water. We might discharge from an outfall at some point. But then you've got overarching water resource groups that, from the National Framework for Water Resources, look to address our longer-term water management challenges. You've got water quality. You've got water framework catchments that tell us how good, bad, or otherwise our water bodies are, and lots of information in those. So it is, when we say catchments, it's really, really not that easy. And then you throw 22,000 miles of rail line into the mix, and it's really nice. So Lord Mayor's recommendations at the end around size, shape, location of catchments. This is a really good piece of work on the National Catchment Management data set for Network Rail to look at what was flowing towards the rail line. And there's over 150,000, pluvial surface water catchments there that come towards the rail line. And that in itself is quite a hard task. We talked AI, Flavia talked AI, but it's really hard, because you've got digital terrain models that underpin how you define a catchment. what is flowing, what is the bounds of that area that's coming towards Network Rail. And there was a lot of work done with manipulating those surfaces, best practice guidance on how to put roads and embankments in there and actually figure out what those catchments looked like, and validating that with tacit knowledge from routes and regions. There was a lot happen. So this piece of work is fantastic in understanding what's coming towards the rail line. I don't want to talk about it too much because it's actually in the breakout session as well. But Network Rail have done quite a lot in their drainage asset inventory. So it complements, when you know what your drainage systems look like, then you can understand what's coming towards them and how your drainage system can cope now and in the future. I am going to talk slightly a bit, so I've gone from massive catchments down to Network Rail. What's in the data set? So there was an initial look at land use, so it's really important to understand how that land is used outside of the railway because it will affect runoff. Catchment slope is always quite important, so time of concentration, how quickly will water get to a point of consideration and where it hits the rail line. And then peak flows, what's really, really important. You want to know what's coming off that catchment. And all culminating into some sort of way of identifying threats, so an overall threat index for the rail line. But again, coming back to that curiosity bit, I'm not saying, there's always more we can do, but this is quite novel. We talk catchments. River catchments have been managed by a long time by environmental regulators. Small catchments, surface water catchments, is still quite an area of research. There are vast methods. I'm not a hydrologist. If there's hydrologists in the audience, I apologise right now. But there is a lot. They vary in age and complexity. There's still quite a lot of research going on. 2024. We're doing research on estimating peaks for hydrographs for small catchments. And there is a lack of information. So with river catchments, you've got a lot of gauge data, flow data, level data. You don't have that with small catchments. They are still so unknown. So there's still quite a bit to be done, but it's just understanding, again, where we can go now that we've identified what is flowing towards the rail line. And antecedent conditions don't even get me started. We've talked about preceding rainfall events, what that ground is going to look like. Are you getting storm after storm after storm? How quickly does that water run off? Or are you hitting quite a period of dry soil? And the catchment will react very differently dependent on the scenarios. I'm going to move away from the physical elements. So those are all sort of the physical elements of the catchment. And like I said, for me, holistic is a lot about the stakeholders. I supported in doing the water management strategy work with Network Rail, and a lot of it came down to people. There's some really good examples of change and being able to do things. I don't expect you to read everything on the slide. And this was done nearly 10 years ago when we did the drainage work, just trying to understand the complex nature of catchment stakeholders. Because it's made a bit more complex with a piece of linear infrastructure, you run through quite a lot of stakeholders, whether they're other riparian owners, whether you're discharging into a watercourse or you're abstracting from a water authority. It's endless, and it's not, this is sort of a different way to structure it from a top-down perspective, and National Infrastructure Commission have even said it's a UK, not necessarily a problem, but it's very complex. There isn't one owner for flood risk management responsibilities in the UK. But we need to be working together. We've all heard about climate change. There are macro scale challenges, water resources, climate change, that affect everyone. And even, it just struck me when Flavia was talking on the temporary solutions. I worked with New York City Transit after Superstorm Sandy, and they did a lot of looking at temporary solutions for vulnerabilities into the network. There is a lot, and Lord Mayor talked about the Netherlands, I think it was. There's a lot of collaboration and working across and sharing that we could really do and help us find solutions to some of these challenges. So for me, that's also the holistic bit. I did want to bring it back to the complex asset interactions, and I know we've talked Carmont and a number of other incidents, but we did a bit of work looking at the cause of some of the failures. And again, quite interesting from a internal, external collaboration sort of sense. So, you know, we focused it again on a drainage asset failing, and that either resulted in probably an earthwork failure or a track defect and then a related incident. But looking back, then you can see external causes again, previous presentations. There's a lot of impacts from third parties, changes to third party land use, weather exceeding expectations, quite a topical one there in terms of climate change, lack of communication between parties. And looking back isn't always a predictor for the future, but it does help us, and we need to be learning lessons to understand the root cause of some of these things. We've talked quite a bit about this one, I don't necessarily want to go on, but drainage failures do interact a lot across all of these assets, and this is the system within sort of Network Rail, National Highways, however you want to look at it, and it's your ability, whether you're track, earthworks, otherwise, to look at this from a different perspective. Signal boxes on stilts, how much longer can we keep doing that as flood levels rise? You know, what does it mean for me? And I'm not saying there's always a different solution, but maybe questioning some of the standards, some of the things out there that maybe aren't working with current times. And again, complexity and risk. So all of those asset interactions, and it is about safety of the rail line. It is about, you know, reputation. There's a lot of damage to reputation quite a lot of the time when services are halted. I haven't yet touched on the nature element and the environmental element. Water interacts quite a lot across all of the environmental elements of nature-based solutions, biodiversity net gain, net zero carbon, and it's a way to leverage all of those things as well. And it is very, very complex. I feel like we talked a lot about the challenges and complexities, and this extends off Mona's initial slide, and we talked poor water management. I did touch on it. We don't talk a lot about funding and financing, or as much as I think we really need to. You know, the current fiscal climate in the UK is quite constrained, and we need to be doing more with less. And the only way we can do that is working together. And we really need to be working with others, and I'll show some really good examples of where we've pulled funding, because solutions to problems might not be within that red line boundary. They'll be off catchment. Let's build a leaky dam. Let's slow the flow. Let's do something together to make it work better. You don't need to read all this slide. And again, it comes down to the cost. Still quite a significant cost in payments due to flooding. And surface water flooding, I don't know if I said, is the biggest flood risk in the UK. It's not rivers, it's not coastal, it's not groundwater, it's surface water. It threatens more people and property than any other type of flooding. And like I said, it's still fundamentally, we don't have a good grasp on small catchment hydrology. So it's very, very interesting. We've talked water shortages. There will be a lot of areas in the UK that will be severely water stressed within the next 5 years, by 2030. When you abstract a lot of your water for rail operations, where is that water going to come from? You've got water companies building significant strategic resource opportunities, pumping water across the country to service demand. But, you know, how are you going to wash trains? How are you going to get leaf mulch off the track? It's not an insignificant question, but again, it comes down to that context of the catchment that you sit in and understanding all of that and being a part of that solution. I've talked tidal processes. We're all very aware of Dawlish, and, you know, things again are only going to get worse, but the Environment Agency are looking at adaptation pathways, managing our coastlines. How involved are linear infrastructure in those conversations? Because there's a significant amount of infrastructure that lines the coast. I always leave environment to the last. I feel really bad on environment. But again, there's a really big role. And there is still quite a number of pollution incidents coming off the rail line, 20 or so a year. And there is a lot of focus from environmental regulators. There's a lot of fines going out, even on water companies, due to polluted rivers and coasts. So again, another one that we need to investigate. There's some facts that sort of accompany that. The interesting one, I'm quite interested in on the right, when I started with Network Rail, and we talked quite a lot about wet beds and the system and understanding the root cause of problems. Again, that system and catchment that you operated in. 70 work orders in one site. You know, there's got to be a problem there. So why don't we solve the drainage rather than the symptom? It's about sort of the root cause analysis piece. We've talked a lot about some of these things, but 58 million for Dawlish, again, it just puts it into context, some of these numbers. I've talked a bit about the environmental performance. We've mentioned it might not be 1.5 degrees, it might be 3, who knows, but there's a lot of uncertainty around some of these things. I'm going to focus on the end one. So partnership funding. So there are, again, thinking about things differently, collaborating, being creative. There's a lot of organisations out there who are looking for partners to come up with solutions to challenges. Ofwat, you wouldn't think it was a natural partner with Network Rail, but they put out innovation funds for people to work with organisations to come up with different solutions, because that's better how we work together. There's a couple of common challenges I do want to focus on, because I did talk about the UK being severely water stressed, and demand is predicted to exceed available supply by 40% in 5 years' time. That's a lot. And Network Rail abstracts over 1 million metres cubed per day of water for rail operations. Because we talk about climate change, we talk about flood risk, so water scarcity. But we are doing things, and it's not bleak, it's not dire. You know, there are a lot of things that are being done, waterless technologies, reuse. It's just really interesting, again, that context and the catchments that we sit within. I am going to come to the environment now and the wider benefits, because water is intrinsically linked with environment, economic, community and wellbeing benefits. So let's use water. I worked on HS2 a long time ago, and we talked about opening up balancing ponds for people to walk around. Why are we fencing them off? I understand risk, but let's question that element of risk. Let's use some natural flood barriers, look at people's behaviours to these things, and use those as areas where people can walk, increase, well-being and multi-purpose benefits. There's environmental sustainability strategies. And there's some really good ways in which we can link water into all these common things. And like I say, celebrating successes. When we did the water management strategy with Mona, we really tried to focus on, when we brought out topics, what is being done well already, because that's what people will latch onto as well. You know, we contributed I talk quite a lot as if I work for Network Rail, but this is in the context of Network Rail. They put monies into Leeds Flood Alleviation Scheme, for example, to increase the level of protection to the rail line, something that they wouldn't have been able to do themselves. Minimising the use of fresh and potable water. Like I say, there's waterless and water-reducing technologies that are being looked at, and a lot of work with other catchments in North West and Central, and rivers trusts, to do, like I've said, things off catchment. And CABA groups, we found these CABA groups were really, really good. They're groups already bringing together partners across the water conversation. And why not join those? So, endless opportunity. I've talked about funding, and if Mona is willing to share the water management strategy, these are all in there. What I wanted to end on is the question, really. What does it mean for me? Because I think we've talked about the physical catchment, we've talked about the stakeholders within the catchment, but it's really up to everyone here to be interacting in that space, asking the question, okay, I work on signalling, I work on track, okay, what can I do different from a water management perspective? And make sure you have that open mindset to be able to do that. And so, again, for me, it's being curious to understand the context. And genuinely, and this is why I'm here, I really want to share the things that I know. I'm not a rail engineer. I've never been a rail engineer. But I'm really interested in water and how it interacts with the railway. And I want to figure out how we can do that better and be creative.